Are you looking for ways to use up your scraps? Let's talk about using up those scraps that we all have. Hi, I'm Roberta from Quilt Crafters Corner, and today I want to talk a little bit about using up those scraps that we all have. Now, I've done other videos on scrap ideas, so let's talk a little bit about what I do with my scraps. I normally sort them and put them into a container, Ziploc bag, container, whatever you have, of color. I sort it by color, and then I sort it by how much I have, whether it's strips or if it's actually bigger pieces. Now, if this is something that you like to talk about, if you could like the video, I would appreciate it, and leave me a comment. Tell me how you store your scraps. Now, everybody stores them differently. So let's talk about some of the things that I do. Now, if I know I've got a project coming up that requires 2.5-inch squares or 3-inch squares or 5-inch squares, I usually go to my scraps first just to see what I have. And since it's sorted by color, then I can kind of lay out the color to see how I'm going to use it. When I start to play with a new idea that I have in my head, which usually comes from something else that I've been working on, I start to lay out color first, only because it gives me a sense of where I'm going to go with the pattern. But not always do I know as far as color. Sometimes it could just be real scrappy and I'll have all kinds of different colors put together. When I was working on my last block that was a little bit scrappy and it was trying to use up strips, I kind of developed another idea in my head. So let's go over to the cutting table and I will show you what I've been working on. Okay, here is the block here. And as you can see, I'm using up strips. I have all these lovely little strips that I've got. I've got lots of them to use up. So I was starting to play with the idea of, the original idea came from these blue squares in the center. And I was like, ooh, wouldn't that look nice if two of them were coming in and the others weren't? So I started playing it with this idea first, and then I wanted to look at something, a different color for a bit. So that's where I got these scraps out. Now, originally, when I was playing with this idea, I just had triangles in there, and I didn't like the way that they were all meeting, you know, they were all lining up. I didn't think that that looked right. I wanted it more of an effect of these two going together and then these going together. So I had to cut my strips differently. And that's when I came across this idea. Now this is just a satin stitched, a very small zigzag, the smallest zigzag my machine will do, and I just zigzagged on the edge right here just to make this fit and lie down. And then when I sewed the edges into the seam, it all worked out really nicely. So here are the pieces here, and as you can see, it's a 3-inch square, and what I did is I marked 1 3/4 inches over and 1 3/4 inches over and drew a little line, and then I lined up my ruler on it and just sliced it off, and there's my shape. So that fits there really nicely. And then this way, these strips are coming together, and then these strips are coming together. So when I sewed my strips together, And when you sew your strips together, make sure that they're straight. A couple of these are not straight and I'm not real happy with them. I might take them out. But if you straighten your strips first and then sew them together, and the other thing I did with these is starch them, because this is all on the bias here and they stretch and they move funny. So starch them. It will save you a lot of time and a lot of heartache. I also starched these really good too, especially when I'm appliquing them down. Now I'll pin here and I'll pin along here and I'll pin here just so that this doesn't move when I do my satin stitch or my zigzag stitch along that edge. Now if you want, you could just do a triangle here. Just make sure that you have your seams going in an opposite direction in order to get this nice effect that you get. So what I do is this will just be trimmed up. Now this, how I came across, how I decided to do this was I had these pieces left over and then I just cut them off of 2 corners. So these are, I believe these are 10-inch strips. So these 10-inch strips, 10 inches, give yourself 12 if you've got longer strips. I'm working with 10-inch strips. Most of these are 10-inch strips. So I've got to work within the limits of my material. But if you can go a little longer, or even, you know, a half of a width of fabric, don't do a whole width. It's just too much to work with, and it's just easier to cut those strips in half and you get a nicer seam and it just works out much nicer. But this does work. 10 inches does work. It's a little tight in some areas, but it will work, you know, to cut your pieces. And you'll get 2 of these off of each one, or you could cut 1 off of each one and your triangle. You do end up with scraps, more scraps, and these can easily be put together into something else and just made into another type of block. Don't worry, I will be playing with those. So this is a real simple, easy way to use up more strips. I think that you get this really nice effect. And the other thing that you could do, and I'm playing with the idea because I originally started with the blue fabric from the last block that I was working on. And I was thinking, I need more contrast in here. So I want to get some lighter materials in between each one of these. That's why I didn't continue with this idea. I want to get something lighter in there to bring out the contrast, bring out those colors more, and really develop something that would look really elegant with these fabrics. Now, whenever we start to play with a new idea or a new concept in our heads, it's really a need to fulfill that passion, that creativity, that thing that we all have inside of us that makes us a little bit different. Not everybody thinks the way quilters do. We look at things a little differently. So I want to encourage you to try new things. Take those strips, lay them out differently. You know, you'll be surprised what you can do with just simple strips of fabric. You know, use a lot of contrast, bring in some negative space, like the negative space behind the little, what are those, diamond, almost like diamonds. Bring in a little bit more of a different element. It will add interest to your quilts. It will add interest to what you're doing. And it also keeps you moving forward on that quilt journey. I want to encourage you to use different ideas and lay your fabric out differently and move the fabric around until you get to an idea where, ooh, let me try that. So this is something that you need to develop, the skill you need to just enhance in order to get there. Don't be afraid to try something. It's only fabric, it's only thread, you know, and it's usually our scraps, which we don't really care as much about. but it's trying something new. It's fulfilling that creative need. It's fulfilling that passion of quilting. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave me a comment. Let me know, what do you do with your scraps? I would love to know. And if you'd like to come join our Facebook group, it's Quilter Swarm. We have great fun there. And this is usually where I show all of my finished quilt tops and quilt blocks and things that I've been working on and things just I've experimented with. So if you want to see some interesting things, come over to Quilter Swarm, join the group. We'd love to have you. And until next time, keep quilting.